Welcome to Creepy Whispers. I'm Jack Thompson, and here we'll explore stories that will send chills down your spine. Get ready to dive into the unknown, where each whisper hides a secret. First story. I've never been someone who gets scared easily. I grew up in Bend, Oregon, where the wild nature and quiet days by the lake were part of my routine. On that particular day, I decided to go fishing at Hidden Lake, a place I've always considered my personal refuge. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with warm colors, and I was enjoying the absolute silence when something unusual caught my attention. A distant figure, almost a shadow, was maneuvering a large, dark barrel near the opposite shore. I watched, intrigued and a bit uncomfortable, as this person poured a thick, dark liquid into the water. My heart raced, and a chill ran down my spine. I decided it was time to leave. I gathered my things, trying to appear as casual as possible, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. As I drove back home, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. Little did I know that the disturbance was far from over. When I arrived home, I noticed a strange car parked at a distance. I ignored it, thinking it might be just a coincidence, but soon realized I was being followed. My natural survival instinct kicked in. I quickly locked the door and tried to stay calm while waiting for the feeling of danger to pass. That's when I heard soft knocks on the front door and the voice of that person, trying to explain the unexplainable. The voice outside was calm, but there was something threatening about the way the words were spoken. They tried to justify their actions, talking about the need to protect something greater, but it didn't make sense to me. I refused to open the door, remaining silent while the intruder continued to insist. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was far from ending well. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped, but the fear persisted. I called the police, reporting everything that had happened, even though I knew it might sound like a made-up story. Night fell, and with it, the sense of security that my home always provided. I tried to sleep, but the noises outside kept me alert. It wasn't long before I heard heavy footsteps in the yard, followed by a window slowly opening. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped, but the fear persisted. I called the police, reporting everything that had happened, even though I knew it might sound like a made-up story. Night fell, and with it, the sense of security that my home always provided. I tried to sleep, but the noises outside kept me alert. It wasn't long before I heard heavy footsteps in the yard, followed by a window slowly opening. My heart almost stopped when I realized the person had broken into my house. I got up quickly, trying to stay calm while looking for something to defend myself. The moonlight partially illuminated the room, revealing the sinister silhouette moving toward me. Without thinking twice, I shouted for them to leave, hoping someone outside could hear and come to my aid. The intruder paused for a moment, perhaps surprised by my reaction. The tension in the air was palpable, and I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed a chair, holding it as an improvised barrier between us. He started speaking again, but this time, his voice was marked by a desperation that wasn't there before. He spoke about a burden he carried and a secret that couldn't be revealed. His words were disjointed, but one thing was clear. He sincerely believed in what he was saying. Even so, there was no way I could let my guard down in that situation. While the police were on their way, the confrontation reached its peak. The intruder took a step forward, and I instinctively reacted, pushing the chair towards him. He stumbled backward, hitting the wall, and I seized the moment to run to the door, unlock it, and scream for help. The response came in the form of distant sirens, a sound that had never been so welcome. The intruder, realizing time was running out, quickly retreated, disappearing through the window he had entered. When the police finally arrived, I was shaken, but relieved to still be in one piece. The police searched the area, but couldn't find any sign of the intruder. As they investigated, I recounted the entire story again, from the moment I saw him at the lake to the break-in at my house. The officers didn't express disbelief, but it was clear they had few leads to follow. The only thing left was the trail of destruction and the persistent feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Even after they left, I couldn't shake the idea that the contents of that barrel had a sinister purpose. In the days that followed, I tried to resume my routine, but the memory of the incident remained fresh. I avoided Hidden Lake, fearful of encountering more than I could handle. Friends and neighbors heard about the incident, and while some showed support, others seemed skeptical. I couldn't blame them. The story sounded absurd even to me. However, something inside me knew there was more behind that night than I could comprehend. The silence of the lake, which was once reassuring, now seemed to hide secrets that might never be revealed. Over time, I began to notice small details that had previously gone unnoticed. A shadow that seemed to move erratically on the lake, or a strange noise on windless nights. Each of these moments increased my conviction that what I witnessed was not a delusion. I decided to research more about the lake, trying to find any records or rumors that could explain what I saw. The stories were scarce, but some people mentioned unexplained disappearances in the area, always involving nature and strange phenomena. Despite this, life went on, and normality was slowly restored. Even so, I never stopped looking over my shoulder, especially on quiet nights. The memory of that person and the mysterious barrel never completely left me. The episode served as a constant reminder that the world holds mysteries that may never be unraveled. I shared my experience on forums and with anyone who would listen, always hoping to find someone who could offer a rational explanation. To this day, the mystery persists, and I continue to live with the strange feeling that there are more things between heaven and earth than we can imagine. Second story, I've always loved the peace of night fishing, especially on those deserted beaches where the sound of the waves seemed to swallow all the day's problems. It was one of those long weekends, and along with my longtime friends, we decided that a night of fishing would be the perfect way to relax. We arrived at the beach just after sunset, the sky still tinged orange before turning into a starry carpet. The wind blew gently, and the waves broke rhythmically, a song I always found soothing. We set up our gear near the old hut that served as a landmark, far from any civilization. Everything seemed perfect after a few hours, already immersed in tranquility and sharing some funny stories between casts. We noticed a figure approaching along the sand. We didn't expect to find anyone there, since the beach was notoriously isolated. The man, who seemed to be alone, walked with slow but determined steps toward us. His presence broke the carefree atmosphere we had until then. When he finally got close enough, we noticed he was dressed in shabby clothes and had a look we couldn't decipher, a mix of curiosity and something that made us uneasy. He greeted us briefly without smiling and asked if we had been there for a long time. The tension in the air was palpable, and we weren't sure how this unexpected encounter would unfold. We tried to keep the conversation short but friendly. We said we had been there since the beginning of the evening and that the fishing was going well. However, the stranger's presence continued to make us uncomfortable. He seemed interested in the details of our fishing, but his questions were vague and somehow unsettling. After a few minutes of tense dialogue, the man walked away, returning the same way he came, disappearing into the darkness. We looked at each other, relieved that he had left, but still with a sense of alertness. Something about his behavior kept us on edge, but we tried not to think too much about it, turning our attention back to the fishing lines. The night continued quietly for a while until we decided it was time to wrap up. As we headed back to the car, parked near the beach entrance, the flashlight beams revealed a desolate scene. Our hearts sank at the sight of the vandalized car. Broken windows, slashed tires, the scene screamed danger. It was then we realized it wasn't just vandalism. Our belongings, which we had left in the car, were scattered across the sand, and more alarmingly, the vehicle wouldn't start. Adrenaline rushed through our veins, and the feeling of vulnerability hit us hard. We were isolated without transportation, and the night, once welcoming, now turned threatening. At that moment, the reality of our situation hit us like a cold wave. We were in the middle of a deserted beach, without immediate means of communication, since our cell phones had no signal. The decision to leave our devices in the car, to avoid distractions during fishing, now seemed like a colossal mistake. We looked around, trying to find signs of any other presence, but the beach was steeped in silence and darkness. The only sensible option was to try to reach the main road, which we knew was a good walk away, but the fear of encountering the stranger or any other danger made us hesitate. We decided to take shelter in the old hut nearby. It was a simple place, but offered some kind of protection, and more importantly, a clear view of the surrounding area. From there, we finally got a weak signal on one of my friend's cell phones. With trembling fingers, he managed to call the police and report what had happened. The wait was agonizing. Each minute seemed to drag on as we tried to stay calm and vigilant. The sound of the waves, once a soothing melody, now seemed to amplify our nervousness. Each crack in the silence made our hearts jump. Finally, we saw the headlights cutting through the darkness, signaling that the police had arrived. 2 officers got out of the car and approached us with flashlights in hand, their presence bringing immediate relief. We quickly explained what had happened, pointing to the vandalized car and describing the stranger we encountered earlier. The officers were understanding and professional, asking us to stay together while they examined the area. The sense of security slowly began to return, but the fear of what could have happened still hung over us. After a preliminary investigation, the officers informed us that, unfortunately, there wasn't much that could be done that night in terms of tracking down the responsible party. However, they assured us they would make regular patrols in the area and helped us contact a towing service for the car. While we waited, we talked about how something as simple as a night of fishing had turned into a frightening experience. The realization of how vulnerable we were made us question our preferences for nighttime adventures, and even more, the safety of that place we had so often considered a haven. When we finally managed to leave, it was already dawn. Exhaustion and relief mingled as we drove back home in silence. On the way, the conversation inevitably returned to the incident, each of us processing the experience in different ways. The sense of security we used to associate with that beach had vanished, replaced by a caution that didn't seem to want to leave us. No one said it explicitly, but it was clear that our enthusiasm for night fishing would never be the same. We talked about finding other places, perhaps closer to home, where we wouldn't feel so exposed. The days that followed were marked by intermittent conversations about what happened that night. Every detail seemed more sinister as time passed, and the stranger's figure became almost a constant shadow in our memories. We decided to meet again, but this time in a safer place, an attempt to revive the camaraderie that always united us. However, fishing, once a shared passion, became an avoided topic, a constant reminder of the encounter that could have ended much more gravely. As time went on, the incident on the beach turned into a story we told with caution, always remembering how lucky we were to escape unharmed. Even as time passed, the impact of that night remained etched in all of us, like an invisible scar. We decided to meet on a Sunday afternoon, trying to revive our gatherings, but in a safer environment, like the backyard of one of the friends' houses. The conversation flowed naturally at first, but soon we returned to recalling the beach experience. It was as if we all had the need to understand what really happened and how we could have protected ourselves better. We talked about the precautions we could take in the future, but deep down, we knew that feeling of vulnerability wouldn't be easily forgotten. One of us, more introspective, mentioned that perhaps the incident had been a wake-up call for all of us. A reminder that no matter how much we sought tranquility and adventure, we needed to be always vigilant and prepared for the unexpected. As we said goodbye that afternoon, it was clear that the experience had changed us, both individually and as a group. Fishing, once a shared passion, now carried a weight we weren't ready to face again. So, without needing to say it out loud, we knew that, at least for a while, our nights on the beach would remain only in memory, as a chapter of our lives that taught us about the dangers that can lurk in the darkness. Third story, when my father decided to embark on that fishing trip with his friends, he didn't imagine that what was supposed to be a peaceful getaway would turn into one of the scariest days of his life. They chose an isolated cove in Algonquin Park, Ontario, a remote location known for its serene beauty and tranquility. They arrived early, while the fog still hovered over the water, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. The fishing started well, with laughter and stories shared as the lines were cast. However, as the morning progressed, the fog became unusually dense, almost tangible. As if nature was trying to hide something, visibility became limited, and as the hours passed, the sense of isolation intensified. Without cell signal, and with communication cut off, my father and his friends decided it would be wise to seek higher ground to try to reconnect with the outside world. Leaving the boat, they ventured into the forest, expecting to quickly find a suitable spot. But the forest, with its tall trunks and thick shadows, presented a greater challenge than expected. It was then that they started hearing noises, a strange clicking sound that echoed among the trees, a sound so out of place it made everyone stop, their senses heightened by the unknown. The clicks resonated irregularly, like a kind of primitive communication that no one could decipher. My father described the feeling as if they were being watched from all angles, even without seeing any movement around. The tension in the group was palpable, and they decided to quicken their pace, staying together as they headed for higher ground. However, with each step they took, the feeling of being accompanied intensified. It was then that one of my father's friends, who was walking at the rear, whispered in a tone barely hiding panic. He had seen something moving among the trees, a fleeting silhouette that didn't seem like an animal. The adrenaline kicked in when they realized they were not alone. My father described a group of individuals, dressed in a tribal manner, who emerged from between the trees, their faces hidden by rudimentary masks. They made no sound, except for the clicks which now seemed to come from all directions. Without thinking twice, the group of friends turned and began to run back to the boat, driven by sheer survival instinct. The forest, which once seemed just a natural challenge, now turned into a labyrinth of terror, where every shadow could hide an unknown danger. The sprint back to the boat was one of the most harrowing experiences my father ever had. Each step felt heavier, as if the forest itself was trying to hold them back. The sound of the clicks persisted, following them like a macabre soundtrack. My father recounted that even as they ran, part of him couldn't believe what was happening. He felt the situation was surreal, but the fear was real and the instinct to escape undeniable. As they looked back, they could glimpse the pursuers, moving with frightening agility between the trees, as if they were part of that hostile environment. Finally, they spotted the cove where the boat was anchored, and that sight brought a momentary relief, but they knew they couldn't slow down. With hearts pounding and breaths ragged, they reached the boat, each one jumping in as if their lives depended on it, and in a way, they did. As my father and his friends hurried to untie the ropes, the clicks continued, now accompanied by quick movements on the shore. The boat's engine seemed reluctant to start, and the tension peaked as every second felt like an eternity. Finally, After what seemed like an eternity, the boat's engine roared to life, cutting through the fog with its powerful sound. My father and his friends felt an almost tangible relief, but the adrenaline was still coursing through their veins. They departed quickly, moving away from the cove and the mysterious forest dwellers. Even as they distanced themselves, the sound of the clicks echoed in their minds, a disturbing reminder of what they had left behind. No one spoke for a long time, each lost in their thoughts, trying to process what they had experienced. When they finally reached the safety of the main camp, the group was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. They tried to rationalize the experience, seeking explanations that fit the reality they knew. However, the feeling of strangeness persisted, and they decided never to return to that cove again. For my father, the memory of that day remains vivid to this day, an inexplicable experience that defied his understanding of the natural world. He shared this account with me, not as a story to frighten, but as a warning about the mysteries that still exist in our world. In the weeks following that trip, my father and his friends tried to find some logical explanation for what they had experienced. They talked to other local fishermen and residents of the area, but no one seemed to have any knowledge of people living in the forest in that manner. The stories they heard were vague and consisted more of legends than concrete facts. This only heightened the mystery surrounding the event, leaving a disturbing feeling that something was hidden in that part of the forest, something that should not be disturbed, despite the fear they felt. My father said that the experience also awakened an inexplicable curiosity. A part of him wanted to understand who those people were and why they lived so isolated. However, the fear of encountering an even more dangerous situation prevailed, and he never returned to that cove. Even years later, when he shares this story, he emphasizes how the sensation of being watched continues to haunt him. The fishing trip that began as a common adventure turned into an enigma that remains unsolved, a reminder that no matter how much we think we know a place, it can always surprise us every time he recalls the day. My father mentions how the memory of the clicking sounds still sends shivers down his spine. It was as if those clicks were a language of their own, a code he would never be able to decipher. He wonders if they were a form of communication between the individuals or some kind of warning for intruders like them. This doubt has never left him, and even in his dreams, he sometimes finds himself back in that forest, the sounds echoing around him, bringing back the fear and adrenaline he experienced that day. The most intriguing part for him is how everything simply ended when they moved away from the cove. It was as if they had crossed an invisible line, stepping from one dimension back into another, into the known reality. The inexplicable transition from a tension-filled environment to the safety of daily life left an indelible mark on his mind. To this day, he can't explain what happened clearly, but the experience has made him respect the mysteries of nature even more. And it is with this respect that he shares his account, always emphasizing that no matter how much we search for explanations, some things may be meant to remain a mystery.